All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. It is 6:31. We're going to start with the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And to the republic for which it stands. All right, we're going to do roll call. Ms. Ballenbacher. Okay. Mr. Chandler.
Here.
Ms. Compitello.
Here.
Mr. Lavasser. Mr. Marks. Here. Mr. Oliverio. Me. Here. Mr. Rodella. Here. Mayor Perry.
Here.
Solicitor Corbel.
Here.
Engineer Glenn. Okay. And Manager Sample will be coming and joining later. All right. We do have a quorum. So we're going to start off with the public hearing for the presentation of the Master Parks Plan. Ms. Compitello.
Yeah, I'll give a few opening comments. We have a public hearing tonight. We have a consultant here to give a presentation on the Parks Master Site Development Plan that's been going on for the last little over 6 months. We'll be seeing the draft plan tonight. We'll be looking over the results that have come out of that planning process. The scope of this project focused on borough-owned properties. That was within the scope of the project, as was dictated by the funding source that was supporting it. There is a little bit of narrative about some other opportunities, but as we go through it tonight, it should be understood that the scope of this project and the focus of this project was intentionally borough-owned properties. And so that's what we'll be looking at tonight. This is a plan, which means it's a framework for the borough to focus our investments in the coming years. It is not a construction document, but it is a plan that helps us guide and focus our investments. This has been going on for the past 6 months. Some of you, hopefully many of you saw, there was a survey last fall. There was a public event in Crafton Park in December. There's also been a task force with borough and commission members, council members, and residents who submitted applications last summer. We had an open application period for people who were interested in being on the task force, on the steering committee. So there have been the plan has been guided by a steering committee. And then after the presentation this evening, we'll have an open Q&A session. There will be questions for council members, and we'll also take questions from the community that will be focused specifically on the plan itself. After that plan presentation and Q&A, then we'll proceed on to the rest of our normal council business. One final item before they get started, there is also a grant being discussed tonight that's different, that will come later on our agenda, that builds upon this draft, but that is not on our consultant. That is council business, and it will be discussed later in the agenda.
Thank you.
I tend to move around, so I'm just going to accept that fact right now. I'm AJ Schwartz with Environmental Planning and Design, and Kirsten did a good overview in terms of what the point of the plan and the purpose of the plan itself was. I'll get in the first set of slides. I'll take you through, I think there's maybe 15 or 16 slides. So you're kind of getting a whirlwind tour of what the steering committee, some members are here this evening in terms of the audience, what the committee had worked through really that 6-month period. So the intention tonight is to almost give you a briefing in terms of where we are with this, and then open this for public comment. And we'll have available through where residents can go. That will take you through very much a snapshot in terms of what Kirsten said. The project is funded in part by the Pennsylvania Department. Dcnr's focus study is what they call a master site. Your effort is a little, typically, most municipalities will do a master site for a particular one. So in your case, you actually were looking at six borough assets. Four of them were what you all know are parks. Two are potential parks. That the opportunities for the future and near future. And so the idea was to establish a business. So Crafton, Noble, Linwood, and Clearview Trail are the ones that we're all familiar with. Some of you may or may not be aware of Creekside property, downstream from CIP fields, and then the public works property, which kind of bookends the other side of so those are the 6 properties. This is not a study of the overall park system and recreation. That's a different type of study that Dcnr typically does, that we're looking for programming, costs of programs, and those types of things. This is literally focused on what are the opportunities for recreation, kind of array what is possible. It has a 15 to 20 kind of focal point. That's what the kind of the lookout is in terms of recommendations. And I'll talk about this a little bit further. We think trying to really balance. There's some, but also, and so that notion of 15 to 20 years, kind of comes to that long-term vision. They have to walk, probably in some cases. Dcnr, oftentimes, there's like this, once it's defined short-term, long-term improvements, basically establish priorities or phases. We'll talk about this. They think again, the steering committee, and really focusing on things that were essential. So most of the things that happen very low versus kind of sort of that it may take a set of years to get things in place to really be able to. So rather than find but the whole nature, the last bullet, was really what are the physical improvements. So part of what we're doing, again, is not point fingers, it's just painting a picture. One of the critical things is looking at existing. So we literally spend time, kind of inventorying what's going on. Part of the steering committee had done their own site tours, had made literally kind of their own assessments of what we had done, and we compare notes in terms of to really start kind of framing what we saw or what we thought were the real influences, were the drivers that potentially needs to be kind of reckoned with part of this point. So things like benches. Example of some of them have reached the end of their serviceable. There's other entities in some of the parts. There's public safety in terms of there's rights of passage or access areas that are not well lit, they're not lit at all. They're kind of invisible from public eye from a nearby street. And it has impacts in terms of how people use it, brings them in some cases. Down to simple things, accessibility. So the picture that's on the right side of the slide shows, we get playground swing set. Really looks fine, relatively new equipment, except there's no actual accessible routes to get to the playground. So in today's world, we do need for something that's limited, whether they're or right site, can't necessarily deal with services. Having a walkway, there's features, whether it's a pavilion, playground, etc. All things that we do. And so we went through and now again, public works and creek side, there's no real improvement. The assessments really kind of while that was going on, also were Kirsten said earlier, they've done a series of surveys. So starting in the kind of late fall and then actually follow-up survey has had a lot of people along the way, close to 1,000 responses from all the different, which is very good response. The best part of the response, people were late. There was very simple comments. The steering committee early. Here's what we think the steering. When we started to get kind of public, they were spot on. Things were mirroring well. So the outreach first focused on where are kind of opportunities. And the second round, we started getting asking people to actually speak some of the things that rose to the top was the restroom, like top, candidly, also had a huge of this one spontaneous play, and that means unorganized restroom. I don't have to necessarily have it striped soccer, lacrosse. You don't have to have baselines for baseball. I want to throw frisbee, and I want to play ultimate frisbee. I can say throwback teams, or we're just going to go flying. So having kind of open grass, then a focus on nature. So the aspiration. Through all that discussion, through all those assessments, the steering committee fundamentally framed 5 topics, kind of themes of connectivity, accessibility, and network, safety and security, and functionality. So those back, the key ideas that were put down in these 6 sites, need addressing those 5 themes. And then the detail there, which none of us for the detailed recommendations. We're trying to take advantage of pedestrian and bicycle connections, touch on that more, notion of having linkages between the parks all the way through kind of the university side, the notion of having so go back to the ADA accessibility. In some cases, some of the parks are not being used, but some people, for example, can't easily get into park from stairs. The mobility issue, you can't overcome those stairs. That's a conclusion issue for me. I'm going to take you through the 6 parts. I'm not going to get into the details. Certainly, if you have questions, stop and raise your hand. But I want to kind of give you an overview. Crafting, one of the most Eric on the steering committee. Crafted park is, this is a different type of place. It's really a reflection of difference. And so the read of that park, because you have actively kind of cut through, put on the other side, so then it's kind of in because some of the spaces that aren't being used. And in some cases, people's recreation preferences needs improvement. So a lot of people look at crafting as the opportunity to recenter kind of what you think. And at the same time, we're trying to deal with some of the long-term types of things needing to be delved into. So capital replacements, construction, those things. So those are all things that the steering committee was kind of bouncing around different discussions with. Key thing in terms of craft and park was to get. So there is a proposed from pool and scoop all the way back to craft and Boulevard. We're also showing through the series of plans that connect craft and Boulevard to potentially. So at a grander scale, you think the starting frame out was how your different green space actually. And so it became more than just master site development, like 6 different sites. It was now also kind of cohesion between. So I literally put on property, be able to get it on potential. Being able to get up to the Creekside property, come up the slide up the hillside, cross Crafton Boulevard, and come into Crafton Park. You know, you're trying to deal with improvements. There was not any real focus. The whole years has had a lot of focus. So everybody really wanted to stay kind of. We did make a recommendation. You guys kind of flowed for 5 months out of for all that discussion of doing that spring stakes. We wanted to be able to deal with turnarounds and those things, and be able to utilize green space. That's an additional lesson. So it's possible of smaller recommendations, but it is a crown jewel. When you look at the next one is Noble Park. This one, I think everybody kind of had settled on visibility from the street. Now, trees from the street. Everybody went to keep that separation, but at the same time, it really takes into the park. You have that sidewalk that's falling along the edge of the adjoining residence, goes back to the alley, and it's kind of space back. It's not visible in it. And so everybody kind of put this on to reinforce or think Noble probably has more national woven into the overall design. We made improvements to the playground, and again, based on the surveys, expanded the playground even further. We added a restroom, small lawn area, suggesting sports lighting on the basket. This is something they're do that, and we try to park even policy. We also added fitness area or climbing area. So we started introducing some different recreational. Now Noble has a little bit of flavor based on Linwood. Again, different circumstance, fairly hefty flights of stairs to get to the top of the hill. And then at the top of the hill, basketball court. we'll get into the park. We have a situation, again, there's no precedent. We want to be able to accommodate kind of a comfort station. And then, again, an area that is not really used that maybe we can repurpose. The back of course, outside of the attic lighting, fixes for the fences, that kind of stays the same. But on the kind of the left of the basketball court, we suggested creating a parking area, to which should be we are then able with parking spaces established some great show you we're able to get a walkway playground and basketball. Kids does that kind of L shape upside down. Heads back out to the street and eliminate that upper place. We would regrade that pool. So I can now come in off the street, go up a 5 foot, still is slow, but it's great. Meets all the ADA be able to get into the basketball court back to the parking space. So we have full universal accessibility. The area that in the playgrounds made investments in the playground, we're showing some expansion to that. But the area that's now kind of repurposed that for a variety of backyard types of things that seem to be what people are looking for. We also then created an adult area, fire pit, there's shade ground, but this park can become for residents within. Again, different flavor for them. Clearview is a little bit more cut and dry. Key thing is evasives, trying to deal with some of the vegetation and the trail surface. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a wonderful place. It's a little visible just because getting some lighting really and obviously trail surface, something that is of course something that can deal with weather conditions. Safe in that perspective. Those were largely the recommendations. Creekside was very much a site that people wanted to let nature be nature. And while it is urban nature, this is not going to the Laurel Highlands, forest, woodlands that it's been there for 100 years. It's an opportunity to get a tremendous amount of and be really you also have the opportunity to get access to church. The grades there an opportunity to sort of find out build so extending the access road through Scott Peak, so you come off that back parcel in the corner there. Make that turn, come down along the property line, have a small trail head down to the creek, be able to have a porta potty or something. Have that be a water access point. Restoring club. So this is an opportunity to do some nature improvement. Not necessarily able to, maybe as well as some then last one, public works project. So you all know making investments in terms of the building, which is the yellow area at the very bottom of the slide. Once that work is done, there's an opportunity then to open up the problem. And so some of the suggestions that we made for Crampton, for instance, taking kind of the ball field that's not used has some drainage issues, repurposing it for spontaneous play. The organized play can get shifted to this where there's a need for flat fields and stop those be able to integrate those. Public works is actually like
building kind of park. And in this case, people look at this more athletics. Whereas Crafton, because it's in the heart of the community, it's very walkable, was more kind of social kind of thing, not so much the organized that. So the two sets of recommendations go in. By the time you deal with parking and all of those things, or temporary facilities, like seen public works is really exciting. Okay, cost. Kind of went through estimating cost. Not going to go down through all the details. They literally went through line by line, so fairly accurate, as best as we could. Estimated based on talking before meeting got started. What we think of gas today may not be the same price next week, which so these are best guess the what valve so on. And we also have put in other estimations for things like contingency, detailed design. So what we try to do is array what we think are realistic costs and that can bridge over a 10-year period. There are a series of other recommendations that have nothing to do directly with physical improvement. Triggered because of physical improvement. Going to jump down. If you go down to the second blue bar, men borough ordinance. So I had mentioned sports lighting on basketball. I also mentioned those are two things that are right now in the parks or not. So when opportunities arise to do some those things, there are some other borough. So we made some recommendations in terms of order sequence some of this stuff should happen. There's a whole series of CIT, etc. We're making opportunities to do and that's what Kirsten was talking about. Dcnr wanted us to focus on the 6 properties, but in the course of the discussion, you'll see in the plan there's some discussion. We don't have design, detailed concept, but we did want to explore because they did have discussion why those were discussed. Recommendations really. This is back to my early Dcnr wanting to do that kind of phasing plan. First, second, third, fourth. So, steering committee took a different approach, and I thought actually it was a real great approach. Rather than because funding and opportunities to pay for things is going to change every time. When Anna falls from heaven, and there's a new program. Maybe try to implement item number 8 on the list. You want to be what they wanted to do, really kind of organize the recommendation, categorize the recommendation based on what the kind of what their characteristics were. So things like essential, these would make the public safety issues, like ADA accessibility. They're all fundamental things that really there's no compromise. It's just the student essential, and so they should have this. We then had adapt. So facilities like repurposing the field or some other type of or changing something here that already exists. We considered it like adapt. It wasn't necessarily essential, but it was giving more opportunity to do things like inaugural was things like the Creekside and public works. There is no improvement property. This is the first investment of this property. And then we had vision that we want to be working. It takes 20 years to get there, but it becomes kind of the cornerstone for vision and ultimately. So as this all came towards a discussion, final discussion, what it really kind of rallied around in terms of last meeting was the notion of commercial focus on this. Without getting into detail what that was, they knew that over the years, it always, those two parts didn't have the same level of attention. So it was time to go back. One, hit some projects. There was an opportunity to catch up. Second is to amend some of these policies, like the dogs in the parks, so that when improvements happen, the policies are in place. Develop public works. Delay on that because that is done through the stuff. Then the slate is clear. Clear of other construction. Other Clearview Trails like surface. Try to have better surface. If there's an opportunity for a paving program, those should happen. So everybody's acknowledging there's it's just that when there's an opportunity to kind of pursue grant dollars, those kind of things, maybe that number one category is first. But when there is an opportunity to fix the roof, so there's a full series of other next steps. Refine the draft plan. Monday, close the business plan up on the 6th. So guys, well, sections of the plan of the project. Nobody's gonna see but once we get within 2 weeks, so at the end of and then we'll pull all those comments together and categorize those. If there's anything there that is correct, circle back. We have today, certainly shows comments in general, but if there's discussion about steering committee, identify what needs to get adjusted. Plan. We also might have to get a plan to do some work. I has to bring months. And we'll finalize the plan for you. You guys for some adoption improvement. Yeah, but that point, that's resolution when to grants having that as part of this application shows that yes, you're standing behind the plan. You're pursuing. Difficulties in the same time. Say, perhaps here where kids want to play soccer. I like to think everybody picks up after their dog. So I don't know if that's been addressed at all, or the reality of things might work versus. Yeah. So in the plan, do that. Yes, if Johnny decides to take the soccer ball and second home part, there should be dogs in this one. I hope this might fit back. Yeah, no, so I don't want to be done. Nope, thank you, appreciate it. brick and mortar, not John Johnny, up by the pavilion cluster in the playground up here. Okay, new one, that would be new. There's also the opportunity to improve those existing. Fact, those we don't need to even be accessible. Those are the things. Second brick and mortar. That big brick before. We would have a pad there, purpose built for Navy season. That would be great. And like today's.
The decision regarding renovating stage versus.
Yeah, so the master plan is showing the long-term flow context. So the stage, band shell building itself, we had the open house. It's kind of, there is some roof leaks and some stuff. Just power issues, and there is a lack of accessibility. The lack of accessibility, lack of accessibility. So, and based on code requirements, no accessibility. So, in the long term, what we're showing is potentially relocating the stage. So, building a new stage, repurposing the stage. The plan, when you read the detail, it clearly kind of spells out in the short term. Got to do an evaluation. Some of the other issues, determine what those costs are. Depending on what the costs are, decide when, you know, we really need to sit down and decide. So hopefully we can do, you know, as is, and that's just a long term. I think there's a lot of people that see there's opportunities to do more in terms of performances. So, you know, maybe Greenway will open up kind of performance area. I think from a steering committee account, what I'm showing you on the plan is where they said in the long term, if we were entertaining for the day and money wasn't an option, it would make the most sense to reward.
So it came up with that feedback, residents, anybody that goes to these, I'm on that. I happen to be on that committee for concerts so far, last couple of years. So I'm just trying to put in some knowledge here. I guess it's a cost thing too. If it's got good bones, then I would say it's worth renovating. I still kind of stuck on who's deciding that it should be torn down long term and flipped around. Because there's feedback from people that go, and I think it's really important to talk to some of the people that go regularly every year. And that sunset's one of the best views you'll ever see. So we've got feedback that it's sun in the eyes. One of the reasons they want to flip it or rebuild it. But I just want to have honest feedback from everybody, and I'm wondering how many people in here have gone to concerts in the park. Okay, that's great.
So very first thing in the plan. The plan is identified that maybe in the past, a lot of the things that the government haven't necessarily formalized. So trying to determine who owns the state. On documents. They've done a lot of fundraising. policy in the plan, one or things, you know, some CPA. Understand, okay, here's how we sharing costs, whatever those. I think the second thing, in case it stays, you got to get a real in terms of what the cost of fix the building at. And I fully agree with you. Depending upon what those costs are, because it all comes down. If it makes more sense to renovate the building, if it looks like it's going to be costly, then it may be worthwhile talking about, okay, what's the plan to do? And it's not going to be the next 5 years, but next 20 years, we will get those are kind of the steps that we try. And we went to one that is probably the messiest of all. Wish I could tell you with the certainty, you know, there's a land lease and all this other stuff. Spend time right? Articles trying to trace a leak, you can't. Well, all we know is you have your recreation partners, foundation stuff. Probably and figure out, okay, we can do a capital project. I would two cases.
That's it. One last question. So, as far as local contractors playing an active role as about to bid on construction that goes on, would that entertain some of the contractors that live in the area? Would they have a chance to be part of this at this point?
And I think for again, depends who. Okay. Yeah. Other things related to it. CPAA is a registered, recognized not. We do have a recommendation. Keeps the financials. We do think that they whether fixing the existing building being explored to CPAA probably should be the lead recipients because in most cases the grantors won't have other grants until that grant is recovered. This is pure strategy. So the CPA would apply for a grant. The borough could be submitting grants to the same grant funding source for different types of projects. It's allowing you to attack things from multiple directions. So make that recommendation. Because CPA is a nonprofit, they're eligible to receive. So in this case, leverage your opportunity. CIT is another because there are not probably want to have but they really should be because the last borough that did I go too fast?
So I wanted to underscore that this plan that we're looking at, there are no decisions. These are desires, recommendations that have come from a lot of people doing a lot of work, but nothing is going to come to pass unless this body finds the funding and gets behind it. And again, I want to underscore the fact that this is a 20-year plan. 20 years from now, that band shell is going to be how many years old? And who knows? Who knows? But no decisions, just recommendations, and they can be changed It's just laying a plan that says we're committing to developing and supporting recreational spaces for our community.
Does the plan have anything in it about like how regularly we should be opening the plan back up for discussion, changes, recommendations, back up to the community for input?
Yeah, I don't think. Typically, again, this is a little. Part of that is just the effect. Foster constant.
Yeah, a new word.
For a minute there,
Yeah.
I was like.
It's a great new word. We'll write it down. I have a question. Was any study conducted to understand the usage of each of the parks, the trails at this current time and the projected usage based on any type of renovations?
No. I went back to what I said. That type of study. Different types of study. Where you're looking at frequency of irrigation. You didn't make any recommendations. You guys are being very consistent, very. So it may be time for you, particularly when. But that's where you.
Any more questions for AJ? Or Kirsten? Right. Mhm. Yeah, sure.
That is a recommendation.
Usually May first, yeah.
All right, well, as stated earlier, one of the next steps out of this beyond the public review will be that council will adopt it once it's finalized. So this is our final presentation here. So if there are any other questions from council about the plan or what's in it, should go ahead and speak up before we move on with our agenda.
I guess one last thing. So in the cost estimations and stuff that were done, were there considerations kind of on the ongoing additional like overhead and burden on the borough for maintaining things like additional restrooms, patrolling things if we open up the parks later, things like that, kind of like the overhead?
If you look at the plan, I think it's part 4. There is a maintenance there's a maintenance aspect. So there's a series of tables. There's actually a maintenance plan for all 6 properties. So customary functions of a park, mowing grass, those are itemized. Things like bathroom cleaning, those maintenance plans are formatted and kind of the costs are projected based on what typical municipal costs are. Doug doesn't necessarily estimate how many hours it's going to take to mow, so, and there's no efficiencies. We looked at each of those properties separately. So if you go add up all the costs, don't fall off your chair, because they're kind of viewed in isolation. They're not kind of, the efficiency isn't necessarily there, but we did try to itemize that. There's only a couple that we've had to put like potentially a third party number in there, where maybe there's, say for a particular facility that you have somebody come in and do like a playground inspection type of thing. All of them assume kind of public works staff, in most cases. We also, in those maintenance plans, there's a column on the table. So these are like 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17 tables. There's a column where we identified some maintenance aspects that actually can be volunteer. So Creekside Trail. Now, to go down, up and down that hillside, there's a whole series of trails on that plan. It's almost like what's envisioned as Emerald View in Pittsburgh. There are earth packed trails. That can be done by volunteers. You can have a trail organization. You can have, a couple work days, work weekends. We checked off which ones could be conducive to volunteer. So I think the maintenance numbers we gave you, and trying to say at the end of the day, is like the worst case scenario. They're very conservative in that respect, but we did try to itemize that.
I have a question. You said you were going to talk a little bit more about the lighting in the parks themselves. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I should have hit. Can I have that back? And I'll use Noble. So Noble, the 2 walkways, so the one that parallels the side of the basketball court that you're familiar with, that's there today. The one that's along the house side, while we widen it in the plan, there's a walkway there today. One of the things that the plan, again, to try to, and this was actually a really kind of a conversation that came out of one of Kirsten's comments, that some of those parks really don't attract people because they're not always feeling safe. There's that comfort level. So that's where the kind of pedestrian lighting came in. So those 2 walkways that I pointed to, the plan incorporates some sort of walkway light, just like a pole light, along First Street or something. Fits in the park. And in the case of Noble, Sportsway, so those were the 2 dimensions of light. Linwood is that way. No lighting is suggested for Creekside. Again, everybody really kind of use that as maybe urban nature. We don't want to see, maybe that part does go with public works. We had them like perimeter. That's the thing that today, because the park roads lighting in there, in the case of the sports in fall, I could be playing back 9 in the evening, but it's dark. So it does need some people are in the park. Balance there. Safety was the
council or, well, I think price is based on. But there's no pro. There's opportunity.
I'll just go ahead and add, like we said when we started, the plan is a framework to help us to target our investments and guide our investments, which is what plans like this are supposed to do. So they're not incredibly detailed, but they allow us to target our investments. And so having things like that in there, having a little bit more than we think we might do, or having the costing that anticipates worst case scenario, rather than best case scenario, that makes it easier for us to implement them or to pursue funding that will cover, things that may change over time. So it is really a framework.
So the two projects that were marked essential, those are the ones that you recommend we move forward quickest. Is that correct? Okay, so the steering committee had the final decision on that?
No decision, yeah.
I'll-
Recommendation.
The steering committee had guided to say, hey, we should really focus.
I'll also add to that. There were a few other things that were outside of just simply what the steering committee preferred, which, and the steering committee did support that, but there were some other constraints as well. So this year we're doing a $250,000 improvement in Crafton Park. So that was weighed against which other parks we invest in. And then the public works site is under construction for the next few years. And so it just simply, from a construction standpoint, that's not something we can move on until the construction that's in front of it is a little further along. And then the Creekside Trail, we don't own all of it. So we have to look into acquiring ownership of a greater portion of it or pursuing a partnership before we can proceed with more of the improvements we would like. And then the Clearview Trail was the final one. And there were some discussions about that as well. And we'll discuss this a little more when we get to talking about the grant application later in the agenda. But there are multiple grants out there, and there are other sources that we can use for trails. So we were not only considering what is most in need of those essential upgrades, but also what is actually feasibly, given other construction and site ownership issues, what is, feasibly ready to move on soonest.
So I have a question. So the master site plan, though, master parks plan, even it's going to be distributed Monday or something on the website. You said, has the council gotten a draft of what's going to be published Monday yet? Because I don't remember that. I don't think I've gotten a copy of the draft. Okay, just making
What
sure.
we're trying to do. What we're trying to do, just as we've done. along with other outreach, was to be able to make sure that we're hitting for the public. So if there is things that are coming. We adjust that before we come. What we're trying to be able to do is what we think is representative.
Okay.
Right, so are there any other questions from council members? before we move on, again, for council and for the public, this plan will be available online on the borough's website starting on Monday, starting end of day Monday. So you'll have the opportunity to continue giving comments if you have additional comments. I think with that, it sounds like we can say thank you to AJ for coming and giving the presentation this evening. Thank you also to the steering committee members who have been guiding this for the last 6 months and putting quite a lot of time into it, as well as some of the stakeholders who have been engaging in emails and additional meetings and trying to gather information and really be excellent resources to move this forward. And all of the community members who took the survey and came out to that public event. We had about 300 responses to the survey last fall. So thank you to everyone who helped participate in this. And yeah, thanks again to AJ. I think we're moving on to our normal council agenda.
Thank you. Thanks. I'd like to, show council support also for all the efforts through AJ and Kirsten and the steering committee. All right. First item is the approval of the minutes from March 10th, 2022. This is the consent agenda and also the bill list from March 24th of 2022. So, and these were all on the OneDrive. A motion to approve the March 2024, 2022 consent agenda.
So moved.
Kirsten, Vince, second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay, now is public comments on the agenda items. At this time, citizens may address the Grafton Borough Council on any issue appearing on today's agenda. Only residents and taxpayers of the Borough of Grafton will be permitted to address the council. Comments on non-agenda items will be taken at the end of tonight's meeting. Speakers will be permitted to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. Groups of people will be required to designate a spokesperson to represent them before council who may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Please sign in or raise your hand on Zoom and state your name and physical address for the record. Do we have any folks signed in? We do? Okay.
Yeah, we have 4 signed in on the sign-in sheet and 3 people attending the Zoom meeting.
Okay. So 3 are asking to speak on Zoom?
Not yet.
Okay. So we'll start with the in-person folks. Just go down the list there.
Robin Anthony.
Okay. Robin. You can come over. Yeah. Mhm. I had just one question. What area were you talking about again? I missed that. Mhm. Mhm.
I think,
What we can actually, Miss Anthony and I are meeting tomorrow to go over phase one of the streetscape. And the engineer will be there, so we can talk about this tomorrow morning.
And I'm just saying that's a tie into Clearview or, put in some lights, or walking trails.
I know we were saying.
Sidewalk, and that kind of leads into that, and the sidewalk is kind of lead down to the school, sidewalk, having sidewalks there would be much safer.
Great. Thank you. And I think you are meeting and there are things going on around that area too. So that's okay. All right. Thank you so much. The next person is Derek Coors. Oh, okay. Okay. Jackie Lavasser. Just state your address.
The recommendations that are made for the community, they set with the plans that you saw this evening. I was concerned and I just wanted to make aware that throughout the entire process, we were very concerned about making sure that we were transparent. Felt like they were paid for and had the input into what was going into the park. So in the final phase of this process, the last not made aware of what the final presentation was going to be. Necessarily, we didn't get rubber stamp the final. And it was a unilateral decision without consulting that we were going to go on ahead and present it without. And looking through the and specifically calling out for Linwood and Noble Park to be focused for the phase one was not discussed. Yes, it was discussed that Noble Park and South Linwood did need the attention, but it was not finalized to the committee that would be the phase one. There are other essentials throughout the other parks that can be looked at as well, and I would feel more comfortable if we said the park system for the phase one versus specifically those individual parks. So once again, I'm thankful to everyone who's participated on this as well.
Thanks, Jackie. Right. The next person we have is Gary Wozniak. Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
They were not part of that final decision that the committee as a whole was, and I'm just curious if there's a reason why.
I'll address that. There are a couple of things that she brought up. One is that the presentation wasn't shared in advance. That's true. And I think, people would probably have appreciated having it sooner. About the decision, though, as was said earlier, the plan is not about decision-making for funding. That is a council decision. That was not in the steering committee's hands, and that was not part of the park plan process. The park plan made recommendations. The council finance committee was tasked with looking at what we could afford in the budget, and has been talking with the engineers through the infrastructure committees as well as the finance committees. They've both been looking at what the funding opportunities are. And we have that on our agenda. So we will get to talking about an upcoming grant opportunity. And we looked at what specifically would qualify for that and what we thought we could afford for that. Which is why, the decision, we'll talk about why Linwood and Noble were chosen. But that is a funding decision. That was not part of the steering committee's decision-making power. That's a council decision-making. That's a council decision, which we will be discussing tonight.
As part of the finance committee, I don't recall making that coming up. Did I miss that? Did we ever discuss Linwood and Noble?
Can we take this up at that time?
All right. Gary, you were okay, Gary? Okay. Anybody on the Zoom, you can raise your hand on Zoom if you'd like to participate. None? Okay. All right, our next item is acknowledgement, the receipt of the written reports from February of 2022. This includes the financial statement, Act 511, and trash collection and property tax collection, police, EMS, building inspection, code enforcement, library, and treasurer. These were all on the OneDrive for council review. Any questions? Okay. First is the president's report. We have a lot on the agenda tonight, and I don't have anything to report. Mayor's report.
I have two quick things. We've just launched DCED study of the Crafton Police Department operations. We had our kickoff meeting actually just yesterday. The study is going to review all the aspects of the police department, and the end product will be a report discussing the relative health and efficiency of the various aspects of the department, as well as making recommendations for improvements and changes over time. That's expected to take 6 to 9 months. Also, that we have a resolution coming up in a moment that is for the Crafton Civil Service physical testing requirement. And the reason for that is that we need to bring our current resolution into line with the Allegheny County changes that they've made in the last few years, because Allegheny County administers our police civil service exam, including the physical aspect. So our ordinance needs to be in aligned with their requirements.
Great, thank you. Manager's report.
I submitted a written report to the OneDrive. I don't have anything further. If there's any questions.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I'm happy to be skipped. I have nothing to report this evening.
I think every president skips these items. It happens every time. Standing committee reports. We'll start off with Finance and Administration. Ms. Perry.
So as I mentioned in my mayor's report, the civil service rules and regulations, physical testing requirements need to be updated. So I'm seeking a motion to adopt resolution 2022-007, amending the rules and regulations of the Civil Service Commission to update the current physical testing requirements.
And this motion was also on the OneDrive for council review. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second. Justin seconds. Discussion.
I will just add, Civil Service Commission has reviewed this and adopted this resolution. It now comes to us for the final adoption.
Is it worth putting up for viewing? I guess it's also, we can cover this in my update too, but it was available on the borough website along with the agenda. So anybody
Mhm.
out there should have been able to see what we were proposing.
No further discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay. Anything else, Ms. Perry? Okay, that's it. Okay. Next, we're going to go to community services and infrastructure. Ms. Compitello.
Sure, we have several things, several updates for my committee this evening. The first is the DCNR grant resolution, which has come up several times already this evening. There is a grant that is due in April that we've known about since this Parks Master Site Plan Development project began. It is through DCNR, which is the same entity that funded the plan. So it was understood and communicated from the start that if we, and this was part of why we had the schedule for this project that we did, by finishing this plan, at least as a draft by now, by beginning of April, we are positioned to then submit to that same agency, to DCNR, and ask them for funding through this grant application that we can apply to one or several of the priorities in that plan. It does have a 50% match, which is why this did go through the Finance Committee first, as we looked through the priorities and ideas in the plan. Whatever we submit for in this grant application, the borough has to be prepared to commit to paying the same amount, to matching that funding. And so we have Finance Committee looked over the budget and other projects going on next year and has decided to propose a $500,000. This is kind of a collaboration between the Finance Committee, the Parks Planning Steering Committee, and the Infrastructure Committee. But based on the amount of funding that we think we can allocate, the funding that's currently going into Crafton Park this year, and the constraints of the grant itself, that it's not ideally suited for trails, and then that Public Works site is under construction, that leaves two clear parks, Noble and Linwood. And we don't have to be very specific at this point. We have thought about how the grant could be split between the two and get some improvements in both parks. But at this point, we're only talking about preparing, allowing Gateway to go ahead and prepare that grant application. We have some flexibility in how it gets used if it's awarded, but we have to have some description of where we intend to use it. So we're allocating it towards Linwood and Noble Park improvements as are listed in the plan. We don't have to be more specific at this time. But the resolution that we're discussing tonight is that council does have to pass a resolution adopt a resolution to commit to pursuing the grant and matching the funds. Did I describe that clearly? Are there any questions?
Can I ask when the grant is due? When do we have to have a proposal in by?
I'll defer to Dennis on that.
It's April 6th is the date for when the grant application is finalized and submitted.
Is there a chance that we would get less than the grant amount?
There is a possibility typically with this, as long as that's what you've applied for and you have a cost estimate that clearly shows the need. The only thing would be if they did say certain pieces of the scope were not applicable towards the grant, then maybe they would not approve that. But we have had just initial discussions with DCNR. That's part of the process. You do have to have a kickoff meeting, and they normally like that at least a month ahead of time. So we did at least discuss things with them and talked about the master site development plan so far.
Vince?
So I have a few concerns with this. Mainly, you kept referencing Finance Committee. Once again, I don't believe that was discussed in the Finance Committee. I'm part of that committee, and I never heard that these two projects were the ones being funded. Besides that, Linwood Park is a very not utilized park. I live by there. I walk every day by that park, and I've never seen anyone utilizing it. Could that be because of accessibility? Absolutely. But I find it difficult to spend $250,000 of our money on a park that no one's currently using when there's probably other things that money could be used for. I guess first, where's this money coming from since it wasn't discussed in the finance committee?
I beg to differ. We may not have talked about exactly what the application or what applications it was for. We did discuss that particularly, and actually at our last meeting, we discussed that the money that we had saved from the changes in public works could be allocated to match the grants. And that, I mean, and there was no discussion otherwise that we couldn't do that. And we talked about it. And again, you know, in finance, we may not have talked about specifically what projects. We were talking about how much money could be allocated that is coming from the bond fund, and that we do have it and that we can put it towards grants. It's really more the Kirsten's committee that probably, and you know, within the task force, there was some discussion as well, but our decision and our, well, not decision, but our recommendation that yes, we have $250,000 that we can put towards this grant funding. As I said, I discussed it at the last meeting and in our last finance meeting.
As for the focus on essential upgrades at Linwood Park, along with Noble Park and the other essential upgrades that were included in the plan, that was a focus throughout the entire planning process on understanding where we needed to make essential upgrades. It was one of the very first exercises that the steering committee engaged in, was a values exercise to decide what was going to guide the entire plan. And some of the values that were highlighted by the whole steering committee at that point were accessibility, safety. They're all in the plan. So excuse me if I don't remember the words accurately, but there were a set of values that everyone that were widely agreed upon, and that supported, I'll wrap up in just a sec, but that supported community support for having a network of parks and having walkable parks throughout the whole neighborhood, rather than just one park or certain parts of the neighborhood that could walk to a park. That was part of the reason why throughout the planning process, you know, each of the parks and the series of parks throughout Crafton all had different types of improvements that would get them up to safety and accessibility and a usable.
Yeah, we'll do Justin.
So a couple of things. Hey, I live by Linwood too. My kids use it. They love all the things we've done with it over the last year to make it as much better than it was. But that aside, yeah, I mean, my worry is I still don't have a copy of the plan in my hands, and we're already earmarking $500,000 to move on it. And I don't know the details. I'm not, trust me, I'm not anti-park, and I wanted the steering committee. What's that?
We're also not committing.
But it's $500,000 of improvements, right? It's $250,000 matched. So it's still $250,000 of taxpayer money that we are rushing through an approval process because we don't have another council meeting before the deadline, right?
I would say that's not at all true. This has been talked about in the last 2 at least council meetings that this was coming. And it's been talked about through the steering committee and with the previous council and with the infrastructure committee since the project began. This was when we got the funding to do this project, it was understood that if we did this and we had it done by April, we could get funding to pursue something. So we don't have to commit to details today. And the plan itself doesn't even have a lot in the way of details, but we do have the opportunity to have funding provided to us if we submit in the near future. And we've known about that April 6th date for a long time. If we decide to wait, we're just giving that up. We can always go after additional funding for other improvements. But if we decide to wait, then we're letting this funding just go away. We're passing on it.
What's the terms on the grant? How long do we have to spend that? How long do we have to get reimbursed or matched on that?
It's typically a 3-year grant. So you have 3 years to utilize the grant once you've been awarded, which award wouldn't be until late 2022. So it would be a 2023 to 2025 type schedule for the project.
Are we able to make this grant application vaguer and remove the Linwood and Noble Park projects? Because I think we're all in agreement. We would love that money to be utilized. I think our concern is there was a lack of communication how this was going to be utilized. And I'm assuming council would want to have more say or more dialogue about this before voting.
Or more flexibility in the scope, at least, because we have 6 properties we're trying to develop here. And I could easily imagine a way that we could spread $500,000 worth of improvements, match 250 over 3 years across 6 properties. And I know you said that the schedules with the public works and with what we're doing at the Crafton Park, but still if we, I guess that's just one of the worries is that we're committing to spending that 250 on our side. Like with I know that the parks plan doesn't go into detail, but So
that money doesn't go as far as you might think it would. And we could spend that in 1 year and then pursue the same grant next year for additional improvements.
Well, sure. If we budget for that, I could, I get that. And I mean, we have a budget to watch, and we have to, if we're pulling, $250,000, if we're spending $250,000 taxpayer money every year on the parks, and that's what they want, we're obviously pulling that money from other things that we could be doing with it. Right. And all the unexpecteds that could happen. Like what happens if we apply for this and we don't end up spending the $250,000 over 3 years?
It's not looked favorably upon once you turn it back, but you're not necessarily penalized. And that has happened in the past to municipalities. And I think even Crafton, we did have to give back in 2014. We had funding for the pool, and that may have precluded some funding in the time being. But again, it makes it more difficult to obtain funding moving forward if you were to turn it back and not utilize that funding. And just, I guess, one quick point too, in terms of it being vague, the resolution today has no direct input in terms of the actual improvements that are being applied for or the amount being applied for. When we submit the grant, we would want to be have a good idea as to what is being applied for, and we do have to have a fairly detailed cost estimate on it. But that doesn't need to be decided necessarily right now, but obviously before we apply, and you don't have another meeting before then.
So what do we do without the detailed estimate of like how this $250,000 on our end plays out? I don't know that I have the data to feel confident. I mean, I don't want to let the money go either.
This came up at one point in the steering committee meetings a month or maybe 2 months ago, probably back in January, that there were still things that were being developed. But if we were going to make an April deadline, Gateway had to get started. They had to get started before tonight. They don't have to finalize until we all make a decision, but they have things underway so that if we want to submit this, they've started some of the work to make sure that we'll be able to meet that deadline. So the steering committee had a discussion at probably the late January meeting about all the different things that people had in mind. And it was pretty clear at that point from committee members. I would say we have a few here. They could perhaps speak up from their own memory. This didn't come from me. There was discussion from other committee members that we should pick something and go after it. And if we're not ready, if we haven't finished the entire plan yet, or if we still have questions about some things, we can continue exploring those questions. But for this grant, because we either use it or lose it, let's pick something that's relatively easy and ready to go, that's not encumbered by construction or difficulties with property acquisition or other questions about who owns what. Let's pick something that we can just move on and not let it go. So again, that was a discussion that came out of the steering committee meeting that I heard, that the mayor heard, that we took to the engineers, and we have been moving forward with the assumption that we would be putting in for a grant for, we've been saying for the last couple of meetings that it looked like it was likely to be Noble and Linwood. And without any other major changes or new information or new plan elements, that has stayed. That still continues to be what seems to be most ready to go and it makes the most impact with the available budget as well.
Ms. Perry?
So at the end of the day, the option is to not go for the grant if this cycle, and we wait out another year. And so what you end up with is we don't do anything new until, next year, and that you guys have a year to figure out what's in the plan and what you do have the stomach to spend money on. I mean,
or we could amend the motion and go for less, or is there an opportunity to expand the scope? Like, is that an option?
What would you expand the scope to?
It's include Crafton Park, include, I don't know, the Clearview Trail, like something that we don't have. Like I said, I know there's uncertainty around the public works space, the space on the other side of the CIT fields, et cetera, right? Because there's a lot that would need to go into that. But like, as far as space that's being used today that could be improved on, right? I think we had heard that there were other, what was the designation, essential improvements on basically all the properties that are being used today. Can we, I mean, again, I want to multiply our money as much as we can. It makes sense. But
there was also support though for what was shown in the presentation tonight and what is reflected in this resolution. It's unfortunate that not every committee member could make that last meeting, but a number of committee members did, and they did weigh in. There is not ever going to be 100% agreement on what anybody wants to do first. And we could certainly talk about changing the motion, but this selection was vetted through multiple steering committee members, as well as committees, as well as what the grant requirements and constraints are, and what, and paired with what the costing is. So we looked at what funding we had and we paired it against what could we get in two different parks for that amount. If you tried to apply it elsewhere, there are some projects in other parks that we couldn't do anything with that amount. The cost is simply too high. Or what we would be able to cover would be so minimal. We thought we do already have $250,000 going into Crafton Park this year. The Clearview Trail and now I'm blanking, both trails can qualify for other funding, and we have continued to talk about other grant sources. So I think I certainly plan to be talking about other grants that we can pursue and apply to other things in the coming months. We have a few that we've been talking about that may be due in May that we could apply to perhaps some of the trail projects. So it doesn't have to be a split this one thing always or do nothing, but I guess these are our options. We go with the motion as it's been developed, with some input along the way, we scrap it and we don't do anything, or we shift it to something that we make up right here, right now, that we don't run test against anything else.
So aren't we opening up the plan for discussion or comments from the public?
The
plan-
plan, yes.
The plan will be
yes.
open to public comment for the next 2 weeks. The resolution tonight is not on the plan specifically. It is for council to decide to request a grant for $250,000, knowing that that means we are also committing to budget $250,000 in our 2023 budget.
So if we do adopt this resolution, who would finalize the specifics that this money goes to?
I will start and then perhaps defer to Dennis. I think we would finalize exactly how we use it once we get the grant.
And I'm not sure if the question is who finalizes what we end up putting in the grant application, which, and we're open to whatever is decided by council, or I'm not sure which committee necessarily dictates that, but ultimately they don't want you to apply for something and then switch it to something totally different. But as long as you are still maintaining the core values of what you're requesting in terms of increasing recreation. And then one of the big points of the application is needs. So I think that was one of the points of the essential needs that were called out from the planning opportunity. And so that's what this grant was focusing on. So in our initial discussion with DCNR, they looked favorably upon that because this is a grant application which you're competing against other grant applications across the county and across the state. So you do want to make sure that you're going about it with the best chance in order to receive that funding.
Thank you.
Ms. Perry?
Can we ask Mrs. Lavasser what their specific, I mean, she said that there were other things that some of the task force people thought were more important. I mean, clearly we have, you know, the council seems to be concerned about that. Yes, I am asking permission. I'm asking permission. So.
Mhm. Go ahead. Yes, you can, sure you can speak. Yeah. Yes, I know.
Okay, sorry, everyone was looking at me like I needed to answer, so. Yes, it was discussed that the committee, I was there for that meeting. We did discuss that Noble has been neglected and that there are some things with South Linwood, though there were recent improvements to South Linwood, as Mr. Marks had commented. My problem was not with the parks. I would like for it to just be a general park system request in the grant, not necessarily calling out those specific parks. And why can't we just say the essentials for the parks, for the park system? Why do we have to call out the specific parks for that? That's what I was. And then my problem was the lack of communication between the last meeting that was held that I did not attend. I was unable to attend it. I was dealing with family stuff. I was unable to attend it, but there was no meeting between that and the presentation that was tonight to say, hey, this to round out the survey that was conducted during the last meeting. Hey, this is what we landed on. This is what's going to be on the agenda. And this is what we're presenting. There was no rubber stamping meeting for that, nor.
That's a fair point. I mean, again, it would have been nice, I think, to have had the presentation sooner, but were there any material differences between what was presented tonight and what was presented previously? I don't believe anything changed
Yeah.
in the
but
plan.
The plan was the same, the plan was what we had discussed, but there was no conclusion that the committee, that our committee was saying, like to recommend that Linwood and Oak Park be the first looked at. There wasn't a.
That was not part of the committee. That was a council, how the funding and the grant pursuit was not a decision made in the steering committee.
Well, that, I do not feel that that was made clear that we wouldn't be discussing funding at all when I agreed. So making decisions and being able to make recommendations for what's important in the parks does come down to funding. Like, and talking about it and saying, hey, you know, we have this, we have this a lot of money. What's the priority for that? Like, it gets prioritized differently. And I understand that you're saying that that is all on the finance committee, but I don't understand why we were unable to discuss.
I'm not sure what else I can say about this. There are many people who would like many different things, and I think we did what we could to try to address them all. But fundamentally, the plan and the planning process and the role of the steering committee was not to decide how to spend money. That is not a power that our consultant has for us. That is not a power that the steering committee has. That was something that could only be taken by council later. The plan was to give us a set of ideas and recommendations and to seek community input on what the community wanted. And the steering committee gave excellent guidance throughout that process. But the decision to, I don't even know how to say this. The decision to spend borough money could not at any point have been made by the steering committee. And that was not part of that process. That can only be done by council.
I'm not saying we were making, the steering committee was making the decision. I'm saying, shouldn't we have been able to make a recommendation for the consideration since
Given that the plan's full of recommendations, was there not a recommendation of priorities? Like what should be, I mean, it sounded like essential.
That is exactly what happened at the last meeting. Yes, actually the last two meetings, but specifically the last meeting, there was an exercise to go around prioritizing. That was what the last meeting was.
then there was not an additional meeting to wrap it all up.
No, we had finished our scope and all meetings that the consultant had promised to hold. And in fact, I think an extra or two were held.
AJ?
But there was also not a wrap up.
All right, so I think we've gotten the question, so thank you. Yeah, does any Colton,
Yeah, can I just ask, I have just two quick things. So just so I'm clear and I'm understanding from a finance perspective, the money that we're putting out for this, the $250,000 is coming from the bond that we saved during the plans for the construction of
Public
the, okay,
Works,
Public
yeah.
Works building. Okay, so that answers the first question. The only other portion that I have a concern with, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm speaking for the both of you, meaning Vince and Mr. Marks, that I feel the same way that you guys do, and the fact that just saying phase one of Linwood and Noble Park renovation projects, I feel like, and maybe the engineer or somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, is it conducive to change Linwood and Noble Park to park system renovation projects? And then even if we still do Linwood and Noble Park, that's great, but it doesn't lock us into that. And if we don't change it and say there's one little thing for $20 at Crafton Park that we want to do, can we do that even though we called it Linwood and Noble Park?
So there's a couple parts to that question. I'd say the main thing in the grant application, they are looking for specific needs and how you're addressing those specific needs. So with that, and you do have to show ownership of whichever parcel that you're applying for. So the more scattered shot that you would have within that would give you less value in terms of the grant application. If you're just the more detailed and more thought out you can be in terms of what you are applying for. I'm not saying that you have to apply for these two that are being discussed, but the more that we can address specific needs and state that those needs are being met by the grant application, the better chance you have. We can still apply for whatever it is that we're told to apply for. I just want to make sure I give that kind of recommendation.
So if are there any other questions right now? Go.
So the money we're saving from the Public Works building, is this just for phase one where we're ordering materials? Or are we talking about phases 2 and 3 that aren't even moving yet?
It doesn't have anything to do with phase three. It's actual money from phase one and phase two, and phase two is.
Remind me, how much money did we save from the building downsizing?
I think it's close to 400,000. If I can add something else, is that, we're doing something like $18 million of infrastructure, stuff in the ground and the roads. So this is a really small percentage, but at the same time, if this council isn't ready to do it, we can push it out a year. I mean,
So if we do not use the 250 or the additional bond money, can that be used for other items?
absolutely. All we're saying is there is $250,000
Thousands
there
available.
that could be used for that, but it's entirely up to the council to decide if, when, and how they want to use it.
So I guess my comment's going to be, from a budget standpoint, we are in a year right now where gas prices are rising, inflation's rising. We're going to make tax decisions at the end of this year. Do we have a focus on parks, children's parks right now that we want to spend our money on? And as representatives of the community, is that something that, from what you've heard today and that you're hearing as residents, are important? So when you go through and make your decision.
So I would just like to come back to one thing. I know there have been a lot of questions and there are a lot of different ways that we could go and different possibilities here, but I would like to say that this park planning process started back in the beginning of last fall with the knowledge at that point that we were doing this project with the timeline that we were doing it so that we could go after this grant, which we are well positioned for because it's the same agency. They gave us the money to do the plan and all but promised us that they would then fund something out of it. I think that Our consultant has done an excellent job leading us through going through this planning process, and we've had substantial community input throughout. That doesn't mean that everyone has always had the same ideas or agreed on what should come first, but there has been very clear shared values and shared goals. I think it's overall gone very smoothly in terms of finding what the community wants and finding that these parks are all important. And what made it into the plan before this evening, I did not think any of it was controversial. Everyone approved and liked everything that was in the plan. Again, are there some differences in opinion on which one might come first? Sure. But there are other things to consider, including other grants that might be better suited to some of those other projects. So I think that between the work that the consultant has done, the input that we've gotten from our engineers about which things are best suited and best situated for this particular grant and this particular agency at this particular time, and what things might be better suited to other opportunities out there. And then all of the support that we got from the community and from the steering committee on all of these, I have no issue with going forward with this motion and didn't expect that it would be an issue. I also have no issue with changing it if we have a way to change it that reflects what's in the plan and is going to pass the requirements that DCNR has. I strongly hope that we don't decide to pass on this, because this is not just about preparing a grant in the next few weeks. This is the culmination of over 6 months of knowing that we were expediting a schedule to make it to this date today.
Right. And when we talk about whether there is a focus, if I can go back to what AJ told us and what we saw with the community coming out for our open house, for the responses, we over 300 responses to that first survey. You know, I can tell you from my experience on council, we have not done anything that has garnered that much interest, that much feedback, and that much talk. So I would contend that the community is very interested in seeing, you know, improvements and having additional recreation opportunities.
Yep. Vince, then Colton.
So just, I think I already kind of asked this, but it wasn't really answered fully. If we do pass this resolution and we need to get in the specifics by April, I forget, 6th, sorry. Who is going to figure out those specifics? Because looking at those drafts, there were quite a few different options.
I don't have that in front of me, but I know Dennis might. There are within the draft plan, there are cost estimates that have been put together for each line item. And I don't know how specific the grant has to be. So our engineers are experts in preparing that, but the we can allocate however specifically we need to be. We can point to that line item costing within the draft plan. I can't respond more clearly than that. So perhaps you can.
Yeah, and again, we didn't go through that level of detail, or AJ did not go through that level of detail, but the plan did. We called out each individual item, and specifically for Linwood, and I don't have it directly in front of me, but Linwood was focusing, that was trying to get most of everything on that plan that we saw, except for not trying to destroy anything that was just done. The play surface was just added in, but getting the ADA accessibility to that, giving some additional use to some of the other areas of that park. And then for Noble, that was from the exercise that was recently completed, the essentials is what was looked at there, which, so it's only a small portion of the total for that phase 1 approach, which was primarily ADA accessibility, lighting, but also the lighting, to improve the recreation, to allow more recreation, because you do always have to have a recreation aspect to any grant that you're applying for. So that's all I'm aware of now. But again, if there was other detail or something else, we could still get that in.
And I think the answer, when you're asking who, that's what Gateway is doing. They're the ones who who do the work to put the application in. So they're the ones that know what the requirements are. They're the ones that have been advising us about the specifics. And that we did need to be a little more specific in order to have a good chance.
I kind of wish that before we had those specifics laid out to us, before we were voting on something.
I don't want to be too kind of rigid on the fact that what you apply for now is absolutely what you're constructing in 2023, because there are opportunities for things to adjust. I'm just saying that you do have to show need and show how you plan on addressing that need. And as long as you're not going entirely off, but for instance, on the master site development plan, initially that did not involve the public works facility. That was not considered 3 years ago when that was first put in. But when it was addressed during the committee that people were interested, we applied for amendment. We're able to get additional grant funding to include that within the master site development plan. So there is always a chance to make adjustments. So what goes in right now doesn't mean that's necessarily what is being constructed as part of this. So as long as you're addressing those needs down the road.
So Dennis, as you put that together, do you have to identify which specific line items are being covered in the grant, or can you identify that it's covering the essential recommendations in those areas and then point to the set of costings?
We will have to show the cost assessment that would have lighting and show lighting and what the amount is that we have projected for lighting. But again, if at the end of the day, if there's minor shifts within that, as far as adding on a different park, or there was discussion about changing the scope, that again may be able to be done with amendment down the road, or even DCNR has approached us in the past. When we first looked at master site development plan, they came back and said, well, we think you may want to adjust your cost here. And so throughout the process, there were some adjustments, but we do have to have a cost estimate that is going to show specific items that we're at least requesting at this time in terms of a need and a proposed use.
So I guess what I'm asking on behalf of council here, because I've loaded the plan that was the cost for the plan. It was shared just before this meeting, so I've got it in my email. Do we have to identify, for example, that we're going to be doing I'm just reading off what's in the draft plan that will be online on Monday, that we'll be doing $100,000 for a renovated children's playground, but not $79,592 for a synthetic play area? Do we have to be that specific?
No, that's a good point. Yes. So giving that 100,000 for like that grouping, you have to give some, this is what we intend to get out of it. But yeah, you wouldn't have to get that detailed with the line item. So yes, that's a good point.
So I know that we haven't all had the chance to see this in advance. So I'll just read it off as an example of what's in this. We can go through them all if you want, but here's one. This is Linwood Park. The cost estimation for Linwood Park. There are 8 items listed. The first is a renovated children's playground. Estimated cost $100,000. The second is a synthetic play area, $79,592. The third is a renovated multi-sport court, $33,125. The fourth is a new parking lot, which was mentioned earlier. That's an ADA accessibility requirement if we are using this agency's funding. $22,317. There is general improvements. They're not listed out here. They're probably buried somewhere in the description, and things like railings, perhaps surfacing. $97,750. There's lighting, $51,500. And then there's other related costs, $154,349. I don't know what that entails, but Dennis, you can probably detail what went into other related costs.
Yeah, the other related costs, and AJ touched on it briefly too, are just kind of certain contingencies that you may have included, or also design costs or things of that nature that you want to make sure that you include as well.
So the total in that list for Linwood Park comes to $538,633 of all improvements that are included in the plan. What we would be doing with this grant is selecting some of those more essential improvements. Rather than doing over 500,000 on Linwood Park next year, we would be doing just some of those improvements. Again, targeting the more essential ones, and then splitting some of the funding and spending some funding at Noble Park as well on some of their improvements. In the grant, Dennis, would we be identifying which specific improvements we are making and how much flexibility would we have if we identify, for example, that we're going to do the new parking lot, the lighting, and the synthetic play area, for example? I don't know what you put in, but let's say that it's those three. Would we have the flexibility to shift to something else on that list?
So in this kind of wide space, again, as long as you're addressing whatever you're saying is your need. So if you will provide that need, and that again was addressed as part of the master site development plan, certain needs that were found for each park. As long as you're still addressing that. So within reason, I guess is the best way to answer that, because if you say that you were going to have lighting and then you decide to do a pickleball court separately and now you're not including lighting at all, then that might, there's certain aspects that are going to be, were called out as essential for a reason, like ADA accessibility. You can't say we want to cut that out of this project. But in terms of if you're saying, well, we want to renovate a multi-sport court, and then you transition that into pickleball courts or into some other type of recreation activity, that would be something that would be understood as you're still applying it. But one big thing that they look at too is the public aspect of it, and what the master site development plan had kind of called out or identified as needs and as a public goal or a public want at the end of the day.
Okay, so Colton is next.
I think my question was answered. I just want to double check and make sure. So as far as the things, say that list was 8 items, as far as the things on that list that are going to be put into the grant application, who exactly is putting those in? That's Gateway is picking those items that are going to be put in there?
Yes, again, we've had the input from the steering. So again, referring back to the notes and everything from that, and then, possibly even kind of just referring to the borough again, just to make sure before but Doug's included on the application as well. So he's somebody that we would kind of bounce off of and has attended some of the meetings, but ultimately it is trying to make sure that we're focusing it on what gives Crafton the best chance of getting the grant at the end of the day.
Okay, that's what I was trying to clear up. I just want to make clear too that I am in favor of this. I just want to make sure that we're getting the best that we can get with this $500,000. So.
Okay. Anybody else? Erin.
Again, same thing. I think my question was answered, but I just want to be clear so I know. You had said that it is possible to make amendments down the line if we see something necessary. So if, like, for example, we are doing this, we're requesting it for Linwood and Noble, but what if we need money? Because for me, ADA accessibility is by far the most important thing to do here for all of our parks. So if we find that there's something we can do at Crafton Park for more ADA accessibility, can we make an amendment and use the money toward that, towards Crafton Park? Or would it have to explicitly be simply Linwood or Noble?
The answer is it depends. I know it's not a great answer, but ultimately, whenever you do apply for an amendment, it depends on whether or not there is availability. And then also, and I'm sure we have ADA accessibility addressed within the master site development plan. So you are trying to build upon that. And that's even questions that I can go back to DCNR and ask now, whether or not we should have something in there within this grant, just to make sure to leave that window open for that down the road. And so that's something I can bring back to them and kind of make sure to get that question of whether or not to include it now, or if it can be included later, just to make sure we have that window open.
Okay, thank you.
Justin?
The bond is, so we're gonna be paying for this with, out of the bond, the money that we're saving from the public works building. And grants are like an allowed way to spend that money.
Yeah, that's specifically, I mean, there are restrictions, but the main purpose of the bond, and Doug, if I misspeak, please let me know, is for capital improvements. So there are things we can't use that bond money for, like operating funds or things like that, but things that are capital improvements. And we actually listed a number of them, and there was a set aside for, for other borough projects, capital improvement projects, besides the infrastructure ones that we already had in process.
How much was set aside for other projects is my next question. Because I mean, it's one of those things where, again, it's a line of credit. We don't necessarily, just because we had some free money that isn't tied up in the line of credit now, doesn't necessarily mean we need to go spend it. We were gonna have to pay,
Well,
the taxpayers pay it back
We do need
eventually.
to spend it. We secured it and we have a certain amount of time to use it. And I can't pull that.
3 years.
Thank you.
85% within 3 years.
So we had plans, and there was a line item, I believe, that said something, I can't, it was several $1 million that was put aside for, and other projects. And I think that some of that has actually gotten eaten up as the projects that we have going in the ground have gotten more expensive or have been added to, and we've gotten a number of other infrastructure grants that were not originally in process when we made the application for the bond.
Are we worried that we're not gonna hit that 85% in 3 years?
No, I don't think we are.
You don't think we're gonna?
Oh, no,
We're
I'm
gonna
not
hit that.
worried. I'm not worried at all.
Yeah,
that
we're
we
gonna
are-
hit it.
We're gonna hit it.
Even
Yes.
without this extra $250,000 coming out.
We will probably, there'll be something else,
Right.
so
Well, so, I mean, back to the point that, like, again, I'm a big fan of multiplying our money with grants, but do we need to be pulling money out of the bond that we're typically using to pay for these really expensive capital improvements, to put stuff in the ground that's going to last 100 years, to shift it over to parks improvements that are needed, but maybe aren't going to be as long-term of an investment?
I think that it has always been intended that there would be some above ground capital improvements, probably along parks. And then, of course, we have the grant matching for the community center, the roofs, that sort of thing.
Stairs.
And I think there was always the intention that a portion of it would go towards this, parks and improvement in community amenities.
Can the money we saved on phase 1 be put towards phase 3? I know we're not talking about phase 3 yet, but I know that's going to be a big overhaul for us financially. Is this something, instead of going to parks, could it go to phase 3 and help with that funding?
I think one of the issues with this whole phase 3 thing is that it's something that has kind of gone into the plan. And I think that there's a lot of debate about if and when that work would be done, and whether other things that might happen over the next number of years might defray the cost of that. And I would have to say that this quote phase 3 was not on the plan at all when we went for the bond. So, oh, it could be. It is it is an allowed use. It is absolutely an allowed use. But I think that there's a lot of things that could be going on in the next 3 to 5 years that could significantly defray the numbers that we're seeing with regard to that. But even with that, that number is now on the capital plan. Is it not, Doug, the phase 3 number?
Yes, it is included.
Yes. So what we're saying is there is money left over, even if we were to spend as much money as is now being discussed for phase 3. So it's not like we need that money to meet phase 3. And at the same time, we're looking at ways to reduce the cost of any anticipated phase 3.
Okay, is everybody good?
Yeah,
Oh,
so I
no.
mean, just to clarify though, since we're pulling this money out of the bond and we still expect to burn through the bond in the allotted time, right? Essentially, we're still gonna have to pay like the tax, we gotta pull this out of the general fund and the taxpayers will have to front the bill, maybe just not today.
Can you say that again? I'm not sure if I understand what you're
So
saying.
you're saying we have to spend 85% of the bond in 3 years. We're going to achieve that even without taking on this $250,000 grant for the park.
I guess what I'm saying is we'll probably find something else to put it towards if we don't spend it.
And that's where we as council have to make a decision
Absolutely.
on parks or, playgrounds, parks, or other things that potentially could happen in the future. So it's an important decision. We don't know what's going to happen in the future or where these funds could go, but we have to make that decision as council right now based on what we have from the study or what we think could potentially be a project in the future. I know since we've all been here, we've all had projects that have been popping up all around. Anything can happen. And like I mentioned, there's inflation, there's gas prices, there's lots of things that we're working on right now that could have change orders or additional costs. Also to consider, if we decide to, maybe if this does not go through, we could decide to go for a lesser amount and not the grant and just pay it out of the bond at a lesser amount, out of 50,000 or 100,000, so that we don't have to get the complete match.
Well, I don't know if we're done with questions, but of course we can continue with questions. I'm going to go ahead and make this motion that's on our agenda to help us move forward. I feel comfortable doing that because I do feel like it's very backed by the months of conversations and input that we had from numerous steering committee members to go ahead and do this. So I'm going to motion and move to adopt resolution 2022-008, requesting a grant of $250,000, from DCNR for phase 1 of Linwood and Noble Park renovation projects.
You're making the motion, Kirsten? Okay. Second?
Second.
Second is Colton. All in favor? Oops, sorry. Yeah, that's right. Up for discussion. Sure. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call. Oh, go ahead, Vince.
I just feel like this has been thrown at us really quickly and I don't have enough information. And my questions aren't answered and my thoughts aren't.
You sure? Okay. I want to emphasize before we do the roll call that an abstention means you have a conflict of interest. So if you abstain from the vote, that means you have a conflict of interest. All right. Go ahead.
Ms. Bollenbacher?
I am so conflicted on this. I have been going back and forth so much and I'm so sorry, but for the time being, I have to say no.
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Ms. Compatello?
Yes.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
Mr. Oliverio,
No.
Mr. Rodilla,
No.
it's tied 3-3. The motion fails.
Actually.
It goes to the mayor.
Mayor, well, that presciently about 30 minutes ago, I pulled up the section of the Borough Code that about when there are tie votes. So if by reason of a tie vote, the council shall be unable to pass a resolution, the mayor, if in attendance at the meeting, may at the mayor's option cast the deciding vote. One option. Option 2 is to direct that the matter be tabled until a special meeting of council that shall be held within not less than 5 days nor more than 10. So your choices are breaking the time or special meeting.
Those who have voted no, do you think that within another meeting that you could get enough information?
Would we have a voice in the process or it's just fact finding?
Well, we would also potentially have another vote
Right.
because we would have Mr. Lavasser, who is not here, with the potential to vote.
I think seeing the report would help me make a stronger decision between yes and no. I think that might, I'm not going to say it would sway me, but I think it would
No,
help me be
I
more
get that.
confident
I
in
get that.
my decision. Yeah.
Agreed.
So you think there's room with more information to change?
That's my biggest conflict is I just feel like I have some questions that are answered, but not entirely. So I think maybe the report would help me have a much stronger decision on I'm at yes or no.
Okay, then I'm going to call for a special meeting.
Go ahead.
Special meeting.
So we were chatting about advertising with 24 hours notice. Iffy, as you know, the Post Gazette only publishes on certain days. Well, there's no other paper that publishes daily. But the Tribune Review is.
Believe the Post, if I put it in tomorrow morning, they could get it in Sunday paper.
So what day next week? You could have it as early as Monday if it's in the Sunday.
The report comes out on Monday, correct?
Yes.
So I would like a little bit of time.
So the report was shared shortly, like this afternoon. I got it, the steering committee got it. So it can be shared with council.
5 days then.
Yeah, it would be have to be at least.
So we're saying that the plan can be shared tonight?
So we would have a council meeting on Tuesday to look at redo the motion. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
You have to decide what time.
Just so you know, we do have a podcast to make up for the snow day for the government on Tuesday from, I
No.
think it's 6 to 7.
I don't think so. It was, yeah, last Tuesday. They're over tomorrow or today, one day, yeah. Okay. Do 6:30 work for everybody? Is that good?
I will not be able to be present. That's a concern. I should be.
Okay.
But I have
Okay. Okay. So 6:30 next Tuesday will be another board meeting to discuss. Okay. Ms. Compatello, there's more items.
This. So this draft report came into my email this afternoon while I was at work, 2:37 PM. I'll forward it on to all of council. So you'll have it. After this meeting, we can put it on the OneDrive as well. And I will move on. The next item on my agenda for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee. The zoning RFP proposals were received on March 15th. We received 3 proposals. They are all saved in the council OneDrive. The selection process is underway. We are collaborating with Ingram, since they're partners with us on that project, to determine who they would like to be on their interview committee, and we'll proceed with setting up interviews at that time. Building on that, the Planning Commission met this week, met Tuesday, and did a preliminary review, and have Planning Commission recommends that we proceed to interview all 3 firms. Planning Commission also made another recommendation to council. There is a grant, the Greenway Trails Recreation and Program Grant. It's through DCED. It's due later in May, and it has only a 15% match. The Planning Commission motioned to recommend that council consider that grant specifically for a dog park. And that has also previously been discussed. The pursuit of that grant is one of the ones I mentioned earlier that the engineers are already looking at. We know that there are other grant opportunities besides the one that's due on April 6th that we can also look into pursuing for other types of projects, including trails. Next item on the agenda for my committee is the Allegheny County Vacant Property Recovery Program. This program allows individuals to acquire vacant and blighted properties. An application was made for 69F 184. The applicant had initially filled in the application incorrectly. So we thought perhaps that it may not be something that we needed to approve, but we have been following up with the county and clarified that the applicant is applying, that this property is the side yard to a residential rental property, and that's an eligible reuse for the program. So according to the cooperation agreement between the borough and the county, the only way it can be denied is if the property is occupied, has a pending action such as a demolition, or if there's a conflict of interest that would interfere with this acquisition. Essentially, it doesn't seem like we have grounds to deny it. So I'm making a motion to adopt resolution 2022-009, authorizing the acquisition and subsequent disposition of parcel 69F 184, and would be in accordance with the comprehensive plan of Grafton Borough.
And this resolution was shared also with the public and on the OneDrive. So there's a motion on the table. Anybody second? Second, Aaron, discussion.
So Doug,
Justin?
I had reached out. I thought we had a choice in this matter, but it sounds like we don't.
That was, I had asked the county, and that was the verbiage they had given us back.
So Steve, are our hands tied here?
No, I mean, you can always say no, and there could be a consequence for saying no. So no, they're not necessarily tied, but if there are issues with this program, which I think have come up on a couple of occasions, I would suggest the council consider whether participation in the program moving forward is in the best interest of the borough. So.
Quick question. In the past, haven't we voted no to similar resolutions?
We had voted no to one in January that we had just demoed of the structure, and we were in the process of putting the lien on it.
So the lien process.
That was one of the exceptions.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
One. Okay, motion passes. Kirsten, anything else?
No, that's all for my committee. Thanks.
Thank you very much for all the work. All right, community recreation and community events, Mr. Marks.
So at our last meeting, we talked through polls, hours and dates. Doug, did we land on something that we're ready to communicate outward?
We would be opening after Carlington lets out. So the opening weekend would be the 11th of June. And then we would go until Carlington goes back to school. And then we would just be open on the weekend of, sorry, August 27th, 28th, and then the following weekend, which would be Labor Day.
Cool. And I know we've had a number of community events discussions in meeting, and I know, well, I don't know that there's anything we need to discuss tonight. You know, we are going to want to consider, there were a number of items that did come up that we may want to consider making some modifications to fee schedules and things, right? We don't have like a nonprofit rate for shelters. I'm not sure that we have much guidance out there for using some of the open space in front of the amphitheater, right? And there were questions about using that space, bringing tents, bringing people. I know we have rules out there for like no vendors in the park. So there were a couple of bigger events that reached out and asked about some of those things. And at some point we may want to talk through some of those modifications we may want to make as a council to some of those rules. As far as the newsletter goes, we've been getting survey responses. We didn't review them last meeting because we ran out of time, but we have a plan to start going through some of those, some of the feedback from the community. I know we also had some reach outs about, you know, some other upcoming events from like performing arts and some of the other groups that didn't make it into the newsletter, but yeah, if you have any other feedback for things that you'd like to see show up, like please reach out to Doug and the borough office, and we'll make sure that you know, that we include anybody who wants to be, you know, reached out to whenever we're working on the next newsletter. And we've been talking through a digital sign near the Crafton Park entrance exit, the Crafton Park exit.
Yeah, and I don't think the rest of council knows about that. So it's obviously just been discussed, but I think at this point we need to make the public and council aware of what's being discussed.
For sure. And this has been an item that we've been kind of talking about in committee for quite a couple of months now. The Rotary is involved, Doug, right?
The Rotary, Crafton Ingram Rotary has earmarked grant funding for the borough to put up a monument electronic sign. We've identified the park as basically across the street from our fillable sign now. But yes, it's through a gracious grant from the Crafton Ingram Rotary.
At this point, we're talking through just, you know, kind of design options and getting costing. And we want to make sure that we had some conversation about how it was going to look, and we kind of landed on trying to make it match the branding of the street signs. So as far as like when it has the label on the top that says Crafton Park, it'll look at least somewhat similar to, you know, kind of give a consistent feel as far as our signage.
And the Rotary's funding schedule is in August. So there'll be more than enough opportunity for council to review the final sign. So there's time, but this is moving forward.
So if you want to see a really, really rough draft of the picture, I can show it to you, but it's not pretty. But more to come. And I think that's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Commission vacancy, Mr. Chandler.
Yes, I will keep this brief. We have received about 8 applications so far. We would love to definitely see more. So if anybody is interested in applying, please do so on the borough website. With that said, we are hoping to kick off interviews for the 8 or so applicants that we have received. Hopefully next week, we'll start interviewing people for these positions that they've applied for, and hopefully have them, hopefully have recommendations to council in the coming meetings.
Again, we have 22 open board or commission seats, so we are still taking applications online. So of course, community members are all here. You're welcome to apply. Anybody on the Zoom, and anybody can make recommendations too. So we want to get as many people as we can engaged to fill those seats. All right. Council of Government, COGS, Mr. Rodella.
Hello. So a couple weeks ago, Aaron and I went to Stowe Township for the COG meeting. Just a few takeaways. We had a presentation from the Allegheny Lead Safe Homes program. They talked about the issue with lead in homes, and they have a program that will help certain homeowners and renters remediate any lead issues. There are some different qualifications based on income and if you have children under a certain age. So I think this is something that we should definitely publicize. So because they will come out and they will do any lead remediation and testing completely free of charge. So
Is that a point in time, or is it all the time that they will do that?
I believe all the time.
Okay, because that'd be something great for the newsletter. Yeah, oh, there you go. Give it back to Aaron to edit and.
Next, I received an email the other day that the Department of Economic Development, that Act 152 blight removal program applications are due April 22nd. So I'm not sure if we have any properties that we're currently considering for demolition, but applications are due April 22nd for this program.
The engineer and myself have been working on that. We will have a list. We have applied for the properties on South Grandview and Fountain. We're going to see if those are looking like they're going to be funded, but we do have backups if not. So we are on top of that.
And lastly, there was mention of House Bill 955, which would allow us to post legal advertisements on websites or digital web pages, which would be really awesome. And they think there's a decent chance that would be approved and passed. So fingers crossed.
And this cost savings would be huge.
To advertise in the Sunday paper it's a crime. And basically that's you've got Sunday and then the Friday local section or Thursday local section, and that is it. So yes, that's a huge bill. So press your state. What we've got DC and Senator Fontana here. So
Yeah, absolutely. And even the announcement we have to do for our Tuesday meeting, and we're worried about how we have to be able to do that. That's yeah, the cost is very high. Yeah, Justin.
I have a non-cog question. Am I able to bring that up? No.
Sure.
Are you done, Vince? Go ahead.
Real quick, the
Sorry.
next meeting is April 24th in Crescent. If anyone wants to come with me, please come.
I don't even know. I've never heard of Crescent.
I have no clue where Crescent is.
yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh, by Moon.
Sure it is.
Is it? Oh, we don't see you again. See you later.
Yeah, exactly.
Justin?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw this out there too. I mean, when looking through the code enforcers report this month, I think there's a couple of items that have been called out at least a few months in a row about things that we should be considering. And I'm not saying that we should be talking about them this meeting, but I just want to suggest that maybe we add some of those items to an upcoming agenda so we can get through them.
Yeah, those have actually been given to the commission for Ms. Compatello.
Good to know.
Yeah, so those are being addressed and they have been called out. So yes.
Thanks.
Mhm. All right. The next, well, no, I'll change this. So the next meeting is April 14th at 7:15. That is a 2-week in between time period because of how it falls, but we will have a meeting next Tuesday, of course, which is March 29th at 6:30. Speaking, we will be holding a mobile event in council chambers before our meeting on Thursday, April 28th from 5 to 6:30. So he will be here to hold a mobile. So it'd be a great time to talk to him about anything you wanted, and that includes the community.
And advertising.
Yes, well, that's why I was referring to the advertising side. We fully support that. The Crafton Volunteer Fire Department will have an Easter egg hunt, and this is on Saturday, April 16th. It was in the newsletter as being the first, I believe. It is the 16th at 2 p.m. at Crafton Park. Make sure to get there at 2 because the kids go and scoop those up right away, and they will not be there probably at 2:05. All right. Any additional items from everybody? Okay, at this time, citizens may address the Crafton Borough Council on any issue. Only residents and taxpayers of the Borough of Crafton will be permitted to address the council. Speakers will be permitted to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. Groups of people will be required to designate a spokesperson before council who may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Please sign if you signed in, or raise your hand if you're here present or on Zoom with your name and physical address for the record. Okay, Greg. Yeah. Sure, it might be easier for especially the Zoom folks.
The sign for the parks and being so vested in the parks over the last 6 months. I would just be curious if the final design or the design is going to go out to the public before it's actually purchased.
I mean, I imagine it would be part of our meeting. I mean, Doug, what approvals do we need to go through to get that through? That's my question. Like, council doesn't have to. Okay.
I'm just saying that something that's going to be.
We can.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why we couldn't, try to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have a schedule for the when, right, Doug? We don't know exactly when they're planning on trying to get this in place.
It would be in the fall.
Sometime in the fall. Okay.
The fall of this year.
And it's my understanding that this sign is going to be similar to the one outside the volunteer fire department. This came from the same funding.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great. Anybody online or here present? Okay. All right. We have a motion to adjourn the meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We'll see everyone on Tuesday.